You explained to me when we were chatting last time just how physical it is to be certainly dogfighting in the plane. What if any physical training do they insist on pilots doing in between flying, if any? And you were doing a ton of sports stuff. Was that normal, or were you a bit of an oddball in doing that, and all your colleagues were just limiting it to volleyball and then back to the bar?
I have a feeling that the public perception of a military fighter squadron in reality is a bit different here. Everybody doesn't look like a GQ magazine model, in at least every squadron I was ever part of. It's a lot of average-looking blokes, to be honest. You have some people that are more athletic and pursue their own hobbies or interests or fitness at a higher degree, and then you have some, call sign Grimace, loves cheeseburgers and milkshakes, and has probably never seen the inside of a gym. Now, the military has physical fitness requirements, but they're not very difficult. I know you've researched them for instance, like the police academy. I've seen your bit on that, and the standard might not be necessarily high to pass. The standard to max it out might be pretty difficult, right? Same thing in the military. In the Navy, you have to run 1.5 miles every 6 months. And how many push-ups can you do? You'd call them press-ups, right, in 2 minutes, and then sit-ups, and then a sitting reach. You have to sit and touch your toes, which Grimace probably can't do, right? But that's it. And the standards are graduated according to your gender and according to your age. And just to pass is not very hard. So there's a lot of folks in the squadron that aren't necessarily fitness models. To answer your question about air combat and to do what we do in our job, to sit in a chair that flies through the air at Mach 1.6, 1.7, that in itself, it does not take a lot of physical fitness. Now, when you get into a fight, it is a very physical and violent, and much more so than they can possibly portray in Hollywood. In any movie that I've seen, at least, they can't capture how much the G-force, kind of how real that force is and how it instantly reduces your vision, and in some cases can knock you unconscious if you're not careful. They showed that in the second movie, right? That is real, but you don't necessarily have to be a fitness model to combat that, And the funny thing is, Grimace, who might be fairly short and tubby, and has never done a chin-up in his life, he's not necessarily going to pass out. It's actually the people that are short, that have a very short distance between their heart and their brain, and have high cholesterol and high blood pressure, are actually better susceptible to withstanding G-forces. Whereas I was an endurance athlete and I was interested in distance running and then eventually into triathlon, and I was doing that kind of stuff, and that was bad for my G tolerance. I had low blood pressure, which is not what you want to have if you're flying in a high performance aircraft, because anytime you pull on the stick, everything starts at 6 Gs. Your head that weighs 25 pounds now weighs 150 pounds. All the blood cells that weigh, I don't know how much a blood cell weighs, but they all weigh 6 times as much. They're all going to start going down to your feet. And as you know, if you don't have any blood cells in your head, that's when things start getting gray and eventually you start going to sleep. So I had to fight really hard to prevent myself from graying out or blacking out in environments where Grimace might just be laughing and not doing anything at all to fight against those Gs, where I'm doing the anti-G straining maneuver. It's a breathing cycle technique that you have to do anytime you're pulling Gs. And I would do that sometimes even coming into land. Like you come in before you land, you do a 4 or 5 G turn before you do a kind of a 360 degree turn to land. And I would have to do this hook maneuver sometimes just coming into land. And the Rio is like, why are you doing the hook maneuver? All we're doing is landing. And I'm like, oh, you want me to stop? Oh, no, keep doing it if that's what you need to do to stay awake. Sorry, press on, right? And other guys didn't need to. But I was an outliner that I did probably work out more than the average kind of squatter. But when you're on an aircraft carrier for 7 months on deployment, there's 4 gyms. Some people get really into weightlifting and get in better shape on deployment because you go and fly your missions and you watch movies in the ready room with your mates and go eat cheeseburgers in the wardroom, the cafeteria. You have some dead time. So some people take advantage of that and get in really great shape on deployment. Others take advantage of the cheeseburgers, and we call Autodog the self-service soft serve ice cream machine, and it looks like dog excrement, right? When you pour it onto your bowl, some people take advantage of the dog machine, and the cheeseburgers are always available, and then never see the inside of the gym, and they come back from deployment in worse shape than they left. So there's a full spectrum of that too. But I always try to work out. I brought my tri bike in my stadium and set it up on rollers. I'd run on the treadmill, which is dreadful. I hate treadmills, but kind of had to if I wanted to stay in some sort of, cardio dolphin shape, right? So yeah, I was a bit of an outlier in that regard, but I did have a couple of mates that were into some of the stuff with me. So we would be the guys who would kind of work out more, and that was our free time to go do that. You go to the gym, stay in shape.
Actually, it's interesting because my perception was that to be fit for what you need to get fit, but actually a lot of it just comes down to genetic predisposition, which actually applies to so much anyway. Yeah, no, that's actually my last question on your Navy stuff. You mentioned you're sometimes flying around for hours and hours and hours, but while you're up there, are you able, and is there any, if you're just kind of flying, just going somewhere, and it's just you're just flying in a straight line for a long time, which you do now clearly as an airline pilot, are you able to? Does the urge ever occur to just kind of muck about a little bit? Why? Because sometimes if I'm riding my bike and I'm just bored, I'll just kind of weave around, or I'll kind of nail it away from the lights. I'm just kind of mucking about. Can you? I mean, maybe this is a rather childish question. Can you just kind of muck about in your plane when you're going somewhere? Can you go upside down and just, that was interesting, or do you just sit there and just go to your next waypoint or whatever you're heading towards?
Yeah, you can. There's a bit of freedom to do that. Of course, the leadership would discourage that. They have a term for it called flat hatting, especially if you're doing it in close proximity to the ground. Like if you want to put on an impromptu air show for your family, over the beach, like, hey, be at the beach at 2:00 and I'm going to do some loop-de-loops. Like, I know some people would have been fired for that type of behavior, right? But if you're up at, you're off the ship, and you're hundreds of miles from all human life, and, you feel like doing a roll or something. I remember as a younger guy doing that, and depending on who was in the back seat, because remember, you got the Rio back there at all times, and maybe it's one of your mates and your buddies, and you like to do that kind of stuff together, or maybe you got your skipper, your commanding officer in the back seat. You're not goofing around with him back there, right? But if it's my good buddy who's my roommate, and like, hey, look at this cloud. Let's see if we can chop this cloud in half by going through it and doing a loop across it. Like there's some freedom to do that. The older the aircraft, the more freedom you have. The newer the aircraft, the less, because the new aircraft, like a Tesla, is constantly transmitting every bit of data back to the mothership so Elon can gather it, to program more Teslas. These Super Hornets are constantly transmitting and recording every bit of data. So when you come back and land, they feed a computer chip into a maintenance computer. They can see. In fact, I know an individual that took a Super Hornet to a small local airport where he used to work as a high school kid. I'm not going to mention any names or locations, but this person took a plane to a small private civilian airfield and put on a little air show and did some touch and go landings in a Super Hornet, and then went back to his base and landed. And he was in a single seat plane, so there's no Rio or Wizard on the back seat. He's by himself, and he goes back, and the maintenance master chief downloads the file, and he's like, "Hey, Lieutenant, how many landings did you say you did?" Like, "Oh yeah, I just did one landing here, home base. How come the landing gear is registering 5 landing impacts?" And then they looked a little deeper and watched his. They were able to see it almost like Google Maps, see the snail trail where this plane went. Oh, it did some loop-de-loops. And so then he got called up, to talk to the admiral, and he was no longer flying Navy airplanes after that. So yeah, the newer airplanes will tell on you. Just doing an aileron roll over a cloud when you're 900 miles offshore, I don't think anyone's going to care about that, right?
If you enjoyed that, you can listen to the full podcast by clicking right here.